You remember it differently, you're certain of it, the spelling, the logo, the ending of the story, and the strangest part, thousands of other people remember it exactly the same way you do. The question nobody has answered is why, until now. It started with a bear, a family of bears, fictional characters from a children's book series that millions of people grew up reading, and millions of those people remember the family's name spelled one specific way. The books say something different. They have always said something different. No archived copy anywhere on Earth spells it the way millions of people remember, and yet, they remember. The phenomenon was named after a man who millions of people were absolutely certain had died in prison in the 1980s. They remembered the news coverage, the public grief. Some remembered his widow giving a speech. The memory was specific, emotional, detailed. He had not died. He was released in 1990, went on to lead a nation, won a Nobel Prize, lived until 2013, genuinely confused by the number of people who kept expressing surprise that he was still alive. The official explanation is reasonable. Human memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. We misremember because brains fill gaps with plausible detail. We misremember collectively when we share the same cultural exposure and the same cognitive shortcuts. That explanation works for most cases. It does not work for the cases where physical evidence exists on both sides. Old printed material showing one spelling, current material showing another, no record of any change between them, not a misremembering, a discrepancy that left traces of both states behind simultaneously. Those cases fit something else entirely, 73 meters below the surface of the Earth, beneath the French-Swiss border. The most complex machine ever built by human hands accelerates particles to speeds approaching light. The scientists who built it said it would help us understand the fundamental nature of reality. They were not wrong. They simply didn't anticipate what studying the fundamental nature of reality at sufficient energy would do to the rest of it. Her name was Cassiel Vorn, not a physicist, not affiliated with any institution that studied spacetime. She was a researcher in the older sense, someone who noticed things, followed connections, and was constitutionally incapable of leaving a pattern unexplained. She spent 3 years building a database of Mandela Effect cases, specifically the ones with physical evidence, old photographs showing geography that doesn't match current maps, printed records that contradict themselves across sources that should be identical. She cataloged thousands of cases, mapped them across time, and that's when she saw it. The cases clustered, not randomly, the way ordinary misremembering would distribute itself across years. They arrived in waves, surges of documented discrepancies, peaking at specific moments, subsiding, then surging again, slightly larger than before, a rhythm, a pulse, something with an external cause. She cross-referenced the dates with CERN's operational schedule. Every peak aligned with a major collision event at the Large Hadron Collider, every single one. Here is what she believed was happening. When the collider fires at sufficient energy, the collision produces what physicists call a topological defect, a point where the fabric of space-time is briefly, locally, stressed, not torn, stressed, like pressing a thumb into a soap bubble without breaking it. The boundary being stressed is not just space-time in the dimensions we perceive. It is the membrane between adjacent timelines, parallel versions of this world that diverged at historical branching points, separated by a barrier that is normally impermeable, but briefly vulnerable to the artificial energies produced inside the collider. When the boundary deforms, the two timelines bleed into each other. Details from the adjacent version leak through. Some stick, lodged in physical materials, preserved in the memories of people who were in the right state of perception at exactly the right moment. Then the boundary snaps back, and the world looks almost exactly as it did before. Almost, except for the traces, the spelling that changed, the logo that shifted, The film line everyone remembers differently now, because for a fraction of a second, the other version was the version that existed. Cassiel Vorn encrypted everything, made 7 copies, sent them to 7 people she trusted, moved to a small coastal town, and never spoke publicly about it again. One of the 7 people opened the files anyway. What was in the files, beyond the correlation data, was a discovery. In 2012, at 8 TeV, the highest energy the collider had ever reached, one of the detector arrays recorded something that did not match any known particle signature. Not background noise, a structured signal, patterned, non-random, encoding information in a format that took physicists 11 months to partially translate. The signal was 3 words: stop the experiment. Nobody stopped it. The LHC was upgraded, returned in 2015 at 13 TeV, nearly double the previous power. The Mandela Effect reports intensified. The physical discrepancies became larger, not just logos and film quotes. Entire biographical records with documented contradictions. Geographic features that multiple sources had photographed one way, now mapping differently. The fractures were getting wider, and the boundary between the 2 most closely adjacent timelines was getting thinner with every run. Think of a piece of fabric folded at the same crease repeatedly. Each fold is small. The fabric looks intact, but microscopic damage accumulates invisibly until the fold that looks exactly like the previous 100 folds produces a result that none of them produced. The fabric doesn't spring back. The crease stays, and shortly after that, it begins to separate. The boundary between timelines does not tear. What happens is quieter and more permanent. At the threshold, the point where the boundary has thinned past its capacity for self-restoration, the 2 timelines stop briefly bleeding into each other and separating. They begin to merge, slowly at first, a detail from the adjacent timeline settling permanently into this one, then another, then a cluster of details arriving over days, absorbed into shared reality, the way sediment is absorbed into the bed of a slow river. The world does not end. The world continues. It simply becomes, quietly, a different world from the one it was. The people from the absorbed timeline do not disappear. They are still here. They wake up one morning and something is wrong, and they cannot explain what or why. A building on a street they have walked 1,000 times is a color they don't recognize. A song they have known since childhood has a verse they've never heard before. A person they love has a scar they've never noticed and cannot explain. The news references an event they have no memory of, as though it's established history. They are not losing their minds. They are not misremembering. They are survivors of a timeline that lost. Their memories are accurate records of a reality that existed, a reality now absorbed into something slightly different, leaving them stranded in a world that is mostly theirs, but wrong in 100 small ones. Cassiel Vorn's model predicted a threshold, the point at which the boundary between the 2 closest adjacent timelines loses its capacity for restoration. Her data suggested that threshold was approaching, that each new high-energy run pushed it closer. What the person who opened her files found most difficult to sit with was the final calculation. The threshold was not approaching, it had already been crossed. The merge has been underway for longer than anyone realized. What we are experiencing right now, the escalating frequency of Mandela Effect reports, the increasing significance of the discrepancies, the growing number of people who describe a persistent, low-level sense that something about the world is not quite right, is not the approach of the consolidation. It is the middle of it. The signal said stop. The experiment did not stop. The boundary is gone, and the merge is happening around us and inside us, and in every record and photograph and memory that should match, and doesn't quite. You are living in the dominant timeline, the one with more accumulated weight, more causal history, more reality behind it. You won the merge, which means the world mostly looks the way you remember it, mostly, but the things you remember differently, the spelling, the logo, the ending of the story, those are the seams, the places where the 2 timelines were pressed together and didn't quite align, the places where your version and the absorbed version are both visible simultaneously, if you know what you are looking at. The Berenstein Bears, the Mandela death, the monocle that was never there, the film line nobody can agree on. Each one is not a memory error. Each one is a receipt, proof that you were somewhere else before you were here. The signal from 2012 said 3 words. Someone on the other side of the fracture found a way to reach back through the boundary and warn us. And we didn't listen. The experiment is still running. Run 4 is planned for the late 2020s at 14 TeV, the maximum the collider was designed to reach. The working group's model predicts what happens at that energy level. Nobody in the working group talks about it openly. The Mandela Effect was never a glitch. It was never mass misremembering or a collective cognitive error. It was the world showing you its stitches. I want to leave you with one thing. Not the bears, not the monocle, not the geography that doesn't match the maps. I want to leave you with the signal. Someone on the other side of that fracture, some version of us, found a way to reach back through the boundary and send 3 words: stop the experiment. And the people who received it looked at it for 11 months, figured out what it said, and kept going anyway. That's the part that should keep you up. Not that reality might be fractured, but that someone already knows, and the machine is still running. I'll see you in the next transmission.